Chapter 1. The Myth of the Gift and the Power of Purpose. Think about a moment when you witnessed pure, unadulterated brilliance. Perhaps you were watching an Olympic gymnast defy the laws of physics, spinning through the air with impossible grace before landing perfectly on a piece of wood no wider than a human foot. Or maybe you were sitting in a quiet auditorium, listening to a pianist's fingers fly across the keys, pulling profound emotion from a wooden box of strings. In those moments of awe, a specific phrase almost always echoes in our minds or falls from our lips. They have a gift. We use this word constantly. We speak of naturally gifted athletes, born leaders, and gifted artists. We look at greatness and instinctively attribute it to a genetic lottery, a divine spark, or some innate biological advantage that was handed to them on the day they were born. It is a beautiful, romantic idea. It is also one of the most limiting, destructive myths in human history. When we look at a master at work, we are looking at the final, polished product of an invisible, arduous journey. Because we did not witness the thousands of hours of failure, the tears of frustration, the blistering of hands, and the agonizing mental strain, we assume those things never happened. By calling it a gift, we are secretly protecting our own egos. If greatness is simply handed out by nature, then we are entirely off the hook. We never have to feel bad about not achieving mastery, because we can simply tell ourselves that we were not chosen. We did not receive the golden ticket. But science and human experience tell a radically different story. The true gift is not the ability to play a piano beautifully at age 7, or the ability to solve complex mathematical equations without thinking. The actual, undeniable gift that every single one of us possesses is the incredible, breathtaking adaptability of the human brain and body. We are not born with pre-programmed skills. We are born with the ultimate, supreme machinery required to build those skills. Your brain is not a hard drive with a fixed amount of storage space and pre-installed software. It is a living, breathing, endlessly malleable organ that physically rewires itself in response to the demands you place upon it. Understanding this changes absolutely everything. It shifts the burden of greatness from the universe back onto your own shoulders. It means that the barrier between you and extraordinary ability is not genetic destiny, but the way you choose to engage with the world. Yet this realization immediately brings up a frustrating question. If we are all so incredibly adaptable, why do most of us stop improving? Consider a very common scenario. Imagine a man who decides he wants to learn how to play golf. He buys a set of clubs, watches a few instructional videos, and heads to the driving range. For the first few months, his improvement is rapid and highly visible. He goes from completely missing the ball to hitting it in the general direction he wants. He learns how to hold the club, how to stand, and how to follow through. Eventually, he gets good enough to join his friends for a round on the weekends without embarrassing himself. Then, something insidious happens. He reaches an acceptable level of performance. His brain, which is fundamentally an energy-saving machine, takes all the movements required to swing the golf club and pushes them down into the subconscious. The swing becomes automatic. From that day forward, he goes out every single Sunday for 20 years and plays a round of golf. He believes he is practicing. If you ask him, he will proudly tell you he has 20 years of golfing experience. But the hard, brutal truth is that he does not have 20 years of experience. He has 6 months of experience, repeated 40 times. He will never get significantly better, no matter how many thousands of hours he spends on the grass, because simply doing something over and over again is not practice. It is merely the repetition of existing habits, including all the flawed ones. We call this naive practice. It is the belief that if you just accumulate enough hours doing a task, you will naturally ascend to mastery. It is why someone can drive a car for 50 years and not be equipped to race professionally. It is why someone can type on a keyboard every day for a decade and never increase their typing speed past a mediocre baseline. Naive practice is comfortable, it is mindless, and it is the graveyard of human potential. To break out of the prison of automation, you must transition to a completely different realm of effort. You must engage in purposeful practice. Purposeful practice is not about logging hours. It is about the intense, deliberate structuring of those hours. It requires 4 distinct, non-negotiable elements. If you are missing even one of these elements, you are likely spinning your wheels. First, Purposeful practice requires well-defined, highly specific goals. I want to get better at golf, or I want to be a better public speaker are terrible goals. They are too vague to be actionable. A purposeful goal is razor sharp. The golfer must say, "Today I will practice dropping my right shoulder by 2 inches on the downswing, and I will do it successfully 10 times in a row." The speaker must say, "In this rehearsal I will completely eliminate filler words like and ah during the first 3 minutes of my presentation." When you define the exact parameter of success, your brain has a concrete target to aim for, and more importantly, it knows exactly when it has missed. Second, purposeful practice demands absolute, uncompromising focus. You cannot improve while your mind is wandering. If you are checking your phone, listening to a podcast, or daydreaming while trying to learn a skill, you are engaging in naive practice. True improvement requires you to give the task the totality of your mental bandwidth. It is exhausting. It is the kind of concentration that leaves you mentally drained after just an hour. You must be completely present in the sensation of the action, actively observing every single nuance of what your body and mind are doing in that exact moment. Third, you must have immediate, high-quality feedback. You cannot fix a mistake if you do not know you are making it. In the beginning, this feedback often comes from a teacher, a coach, or a mentor, someone who can watch you from the outside and say, "Your elbow is too low," or "Your pacing is entirely too fast." But over time, through intense observation, you must learn to generate this feedback yourself. You use mirrors, you record video of yourself, you track your metrics obsessively. You must create a continuous loop where an action is taken, the result is analyzed, and a correction is immediately applied to the very next attempt. Finally, and most crucially, purposeful practice requires you to constantly, intentionally step completely outside of your comfort zone. This is where the magic happens, and it is also why so few people ever achieve true greatness. The comfort zone is a warm, pleasant place where you do the things you already know how to do. Growth does not live there. To improve, you must attempt things that you currently cannot do. You must push yourself to the exact edge of your current capabilities where you feel off balance, frustrated, and inadequate. When you push past your comfort zone, you will inevitably fail. You will stumble, you will sound terrible, you will miss the mark. Most people view this failure as a sign that they lack the gift and should quit. But a person engaged in purposeful practice understands that failure is the entire point. When you fail, you are mapping the exact boundaries of your current limitations. The struggle you feel when you are trying to stretch your abilities is not a sign of weakness. It is the biological sensation of your brain being forced to rewire itself to meet a new demand. Think of this process like lifting weights. If you go to the gym and lift 5-pound dumbbells every day for a year, your muscles will never grow. They have no reason to. They are perfectly adapted to lifting 5 pounds. To force a muscle to grow, you must lift a weight that is heavier than what the muscle is currently capable of handling easily. You must tear the muscle fibers slightly, creating a biological crisis that forces the body to adapt and come back stronger. Your mind and your skills operate on the exact same principle. Purposeful practice is the act of intentionally lifting a heavier mental weight. It is the conscious decision to reject the easy path of automation, to embrace the friction of learning, and to meticulously chip away at your own limitations day after day. The myth of the gift tells you to look at a master and marvel at their innate genius. The reality of purposeful practice invites you to look at a master and realize that you are looking at an ordinary human being who simply refused to stop pushing the boundaries of their comfort zone. They did not have magic in their blood. They had a specific, relentless method. By understanding that your potential is not fixed, and by adopting the mechanics of purposeful practice, you hold the keys to unlocking capabilities you never dreamed were possible. But this is only the beginning of the journey. To truly master any domain, you must understand the deep biological mechanisms of how your body and mind actually execute these changes. You must understand the engine under the hood. Chapter 2. The Adaptable Human Machine. There is a profound, almost invisible force governing your life right now. It is dictating how you feel, how you think, and what you are capable of achieving. It is an ancient survival mechanism built into the very cells of your body, and its sole purpose is to keep you perfectly, undeniably comfortable. In the biological world, this force is called homeostasis. Simply put, homeostasis is your body's deep, unrelenting desire for stability. Your physical and mental systems want everything to remain exactly as it is. Your internal temperature, your heart rate, the density of your muscles, and the neural pathways in your brain have all settled into a comfortable equilibrium based on the life you currently live. Your body is a highly efficient machine, and efficiency means never spending an ounce of energy that is not absolutely necessary. If you do the same things every day, think the same thoughts, and lift the same physical and mental weights, your body has no reason to change. It goes into a state of profound biological cruise control. But this beautiful system of survival is also the greatest enemy of human potential. When you understand homeostasis, you begin to understand why growth is so incredibly difficult and why plateaus are so frustratingly common. To achieve any kind of true greatness, you must learn to become the enemy of your own comfort. You must wage a calculated war on your body's desire for stability. You have to force it into a state of crisis. Imagine a woman who has lived her entire life in a city perfectly level with the sea. Her body is a masterclass in efficiency for that specific environment. Her lungs take in the dense, oxygen-rich air with minimal effort. Her heart beats at a steady, relaxed pace. Now imagine she packs her belongings and moves to a cabin located high up in the rugged peaks of a towering mountain range. On her first day there, simply carrying a box of books from her car to the front door feels like a devastating physical ordeal. Her chest heaves, she gasps for air, her heart hammers wildly against her ribs, and a wave of dizzying exhaustion washes over her. She has to sit down on the dirt path, feeling utterly defeated. What is happening in this moment? Her body has been thrown out of homeostasis. The thin mountain air contains far less oxygen than she is used to, and the effort of lifting the box has sent an emergency signal screaming through her nervous system. Her brain is ringing the alarm, desperately communicating that the current physical machinery is entirely inadequate for this new environment. It is a terrifying, uncomfortable sensation. Most people, when faced with this kind of biological alarm, will sit down, rest, and try to avoid triggering it again. They retreat back into the safety of the comfort zone. But watch what happens if this woman refuses to retreat. Watch what happens if every single day she forces herself to walk up a steep hill near her cabin, deliberately pushing herself back into that breathless, heart-pounding state of crisis. Because her body realizes that this intense new demand is not going away, it gives up on its old equilibrium and begins to physically rebuild itself. It is not a metaphor. It is a literal, microscopic construction project. Deep inside the marrow of her bones, biological factories go into overdrive, manufacturing millions of brand new red blood cells to capture the scarce oxygen. Tiny new capillaries sprout through her muscle tissue to deliver that oxygen more efficiently. Her lung capacity expands. The walls of her heart grow thicker and stronger. 6 months later, she walks out of her cabin, picks up a heavy load of firewood, and strides up the very same hill without breaking a sweat. The mountain has not changed. The air is just as thin, but she is fundamentally, structurally different. Her body rebuilt itself to make the impossible feel completely normal. This is the miracle of the adaptable human machine. Your body is not a fixed, rigid vessel. It is a dynamic, responsive organism that will literally reshape its own anatomy to survive the demands you place upon it. For a long time, we understood that muscles and lungs could adapt to physical stress. But for generations, a dark and limiting belief hovered over the realm of human intellect and skill. We believed that while the body might be somewhat adaptable, the adult brain was not. We treated the human mind like a piece of clay that hardens in the kiln of childhood. By the time you reached adulthood, the popular belief was that your intelligence, your memory, and your capacity to learn complex skills were permanently set in stone. You were either born with a brilliant mind, or you were not. We now know with absolute certainty that this is entirely false. The brain is just like the heart, the lungs, and the muscles. It is craving homeostasis, yes, but it is infinitely capable of profound physical adaptation. Consider the experience of moving to a foreign country where you do not speak a single word of the local language. In the beginning, walking through a busy marketplace is a chaotic, overwhelming experience. People are shouting, conversing, and laughing, but to your ears it is just a rushing river of meaningless noise. Your brain searches frantically for familiar patterns, for anchor points, but finds nothing. The cognitive effort required simply to buy a piece of fruit or ask for directions is exhausting. By the end of the day, you have a headache. You feel a deep mental fatigue that sleep hardly touches. That headache, that fatigue, is the mental equivalent of the woman gasping for air on the mountain. It is the feeling of your brain being pushed violently out of its comfort zone. If you surrender to the fatigue and retreat to communities where only your native language is spoken, your brain will happily return to its resting state and you will never learn. But if you force yourself into the marketplace every day, listening intensely, stumbling over syllables, looking foolish, and aggressively demanding that your brain make sense of the noise, something miraculous occurs in the dark silence of your skull. Your brain physically rewires itself. Neurons, the tiny cells responsible for transmitting information, begin to grow new physical extensions. They branch out like the roots of a tree, reaching across microscopic gaps to connect with other neurons. They build entirely new networks. Furthermore, the brain coats these newly formed pathways with a fatty substance that acts like insulation on a copper wire, allowing the electrical signals to travel faster and more efficiently. Months later, you are walking through the exact same marketplace. You hear a merchant shout a joke across the aisle, and before you even consciously realize what you are doing, you laugh. The noise is no longer noise, it is meaning. Your brain did not just learn a new trick, it physically grew new structures to accommodate a demand you refuse to let go of. This is the secret behind every extraordinary human capability. Whether it is a chess grandmaster memorizing the positions of 30 pieces in a split second, a surgeon navigating microscopic blood vessels with perfectly steady hands, or a martial artist reacting to a strike faster than conscious thought allows, none of these people were born with those specific neural pathways. They built them. They subjected their brains and bodies to relentless, targeted stress, forcing their internal systems out of homeostasis again and again and again. But here is the most crucial, dangerous catch in this entire process. The adaptable human machine is deeply pragmatic. It will only change exactly as much as it absolutely needs to, and not a single degree more. Let us return to the woman on the mountain. Once her body has built enough red blood cells to comfortably carry firewood up her hill, the biological alarms turn off. The crisis is over. A new state of homeostasis has been achieved. If she continues to walk up that same hill carrying the same amount of wood every day for the next 30 years, she will not get any stronger. Her cardiovascular fitness will flatline exactly at the level required for that specific task. This is why millions of well-intentioned people spend their lives practicing skills, working hard, and never achieving mastery. They push themselves just hard enough to reach a new plateau, a new level of acceptable comfort, and once the brain and body no longer feel threatened by the task, adaptation slams to a complete halt. To continue growing, you must become the master of controlled discomfort. You must deliberately seek out the edge of your new capabilities and step just over the line. When the mountain trail becomes easy, you must strap a heavy pack to your back. When the language becomes conversational, you must start reading complex poetry or debating philosophy. When the piano piece is finally memorized, you must play it faster or in a different key or with your eyes closed. You must continuously move the finish line. True expertise is not a destination where you finally get to rest. It is a lifelong commitment to systematically breaking your own equilibrium. It requires the immense courage to look at the skills you have worked so hard to build and intentionally break them down by demanding even more. We are not prisoners of our genetics. We are the architects of our own biology. The human machine is waiting for your orders. It is ready to build thicker muscles, faster reflexes, and denser, more brilliant neural networks. But it will not do it simply because you wish for it. It will only do it when you leave it absolutely no other choice. As we move forward, the question is no longer whether we can change, but exactly what we are trying to build inside our minds when we do. When an expert looks at a problem, they do not see the world the way the rest of us do. They have constructed an entirely different reality inside their heads. To understand how they achieve the impossible, we must understand the invisible mental structures that separate the master from the amateur. Chapter 3. Seeing the forest and the trees. Mental representations. Imagine standing on the shoulder of a busy highway under a steady, freezing rain. Your car is pulled over, the hazard lights blinking rhythmically against the grey afternoon. Just moments ago you were driving along when a sudden, terrifying grinding noise erupted from deep within the engine. Your vehicle shuddered violently and you wrestled it to the side of the road. To you, that sound was nothing but pure, undifferentiated chaos. It was the terrifying noise of something profoundly broken, a sensory assault that told you only one thing: danger. 30 minutes later, a seasoned tow truck driver pulls up behind you. He steps out into the rain, wipes his hands on his overalls, and asks you to start the engine one more time. You turn the key, and that same horrible metal-on-metal grinding tears through the air. You wince. But the mechanic does not wince. He tilts his head slightly. His eyes lose their focus on the immediate surroundings, gazing off into the middle distance. In that fleeting moment, the mechanic is performing a cognitive miracle. He is not hearing a chaotic noise. Inside his mind, that sound translates instantly into a highly detailed, three-dimensional blueprint of a combustion engine. He hears the specific rhythm of the pistons, he visualizes the exact position of a worn-out serpentine belt, and he pictures the precise way a failing water pump is struggling to turn. Where you heard destruction, he heard a very specific mechanical story. He looks at you and calmly explains exactly which bearing has shattered and how long it will take to fix. How did he do that? He does not possess superhuman hearing. If you were to test his auditory acuity in a laboratory, it would likely be no better than yours. He does not possess a magically superior intellect. What he possesses is something far more powerful, built over thousands of hours of greasy hands and skinned knuckles. He has developed an incredibly sophisticated mental representation of an automobile engine. A mental representation is an invisible cognitive structure that exists inside the mind of every true master, regardless of their field. It is a highly organized, deeply interconnected map of information that allows a person to instantly make sense of a complex situation. It is the fundamental difference between the amateur and the expert. The amateur looks at a situation and sees dozens of individual, confusing pieces of data. They see the trees. The expert looks at the exact same situation and instantly perceives the entire ecosystem. They see the forest. To truly understand the profound power of a mental representation, we have to look at the severe limitations of the human brain. We all possess a mental workspace called short-term memory. It is the part of your brain that holds onto information you are actively using right now, and it is incredibly weak. If someone reads you a list of random numbers, you will probably remember about 7 of them before your brain starts dropping the older ones to make room for the new ones. It is a severe biological bottleneck. When you are a novice attempting a new skill, you are constantly fighting this bottleneck. Imagine a person learning to drive a car with a manual transmission for the very first time. They have to think about the clutch pedal, the gas pedal, the gear shift, the rear view mirror, the speedometer, and the car braking in front of them. It is too much information for their short-term memory to handle. They panic, they stall the engine, and they feel completely overwhelmed. Every single element is a separate, heavy piece of data weighing down their mind. But consider the veteran truck driver who has been driving a manual transmission for 2 decades. They are negotiating rush-hour traffic in a torrential downpour while sipping a cup of coffee and holding a complex conversation with their passenger. They are not consciously thinking about the clutch or the gears at all. This is not because driving has become completely mindless. It is because the veteran driver has constructed a massive, intricate mental representation of driving. In their mind, the clutch, the gas, the steering wheel, and the spatial awareness of the road are no longer separate, heavy pieces of data. They have been fused together into one single, elegant concept. The master driver's brain handles all of those complex moving parts as one unified whole. This frees up massive amounts of cognitive space. They have bypassed the biological limits of short-term memory by changing the very structure of the information inside their head. This structural shift unlocks one of the most remarkable superpowers of human mastery, the ability to predict the future. We often look at world-class athletes like a masterful tennis player or a brilliant soccer midfielder, and we marvel at their reflexes. We assume their nervous systems are simply wired faster than ours, allowing them to react to a speeding ball with superhuman speed. But the science of human performance tells a completely different story. The grandmasters of physical sports do not have significantly faster reflexes than average athletes. They are not reacting faster, they are acting earlier. When a master soccer player looks down the field, they are not just seeing 21 other people running around on the grass. Through their highly developed mental representations, they see invisible lines of force and probability. They read the subtle shift in a defender's hips. They recognize a pattern of movement that they have seen in thousands of previous matches. Long before the ball is even kicked, their mental map tells them exactly where the ball is going to go. Because they can visualize the outcome before it happens, they begin moving toward the destination a split second before anyone else even realizes the play has started. To the untrained eye, it looks like psychic intuition or blinding speed. In reality, it is the quiet, invisible power of a highly organized mind. This phenomenon extends to absolutely every area of human endeavor. A master writer reading a first draft does not just see misspelled words or clunky sentences. They have a mental representation of narrative flow, character arc, and emotional resonance. They can feel the invisible architecture of the story sagging in the middle, and they know exactly which structural beams need to be reinforced to hold the reader's attention. A seasoned emergency room nurse walking into a chaotic trauma bay does not see a confusing blur of blood, shouting doctors, and beeping machines. They have a mental representation of human physiology in crisis. They instantly lock onto the color of the patient's skin and the specific rhythm of a monitor, automatically filtering out the noise to identify the single most critical intervention needed to save a life. Mental representations dictate not only how we perceive the world, but how effectively we can operate within it. The more complex and refined your mental map, the better your decisions will be and the faster you will execute them. But here is the most critical realization for your own journey toward mastery. You cannot buy a mental representation, and you cannot passively absorb one. You cannot build a mental representation of leadership by simply reading 100 books on management. You cannot build a mental representation of playing the guitar by watching thousands of hours of concerts. Reading and watching are forms of information gathering, but mental representations are not made of raw information. They are forged in the fires of action, failure, and correction. The only way to build a robust, powerful mental map is to get your hands dirty. You must try to perform the skill, make a terrible mistake, feel the sting of that failure, analyze exactly why you failed, and try again. It is the friction of purposefully wrestling with a problem that forces your brain to carve out those new neural pathways. The struggle is not getting in the way of building the representation. The struggle is the building of the representation. Every time you step outside your comfort zone and demand more of yourself, you are adding a new layer of detail to your internal blueprint. You are turning the chaotic noise of the world into a beautiful structured symphony. You are learning to see the forest. However, to build these maps efficiently, to ensure that the pain of practice actually translates into the beauty of mastery, you cannot just flail around in the dark hoping for the best. You need a system. You need a highly specific, historically proven architecture for your daily efforts. You must move beyond simply practicing with purpose and elevate your actions to the ultimate standard of human development. Chapter 4. The Gold Standard. Imagine an explorer deciding to conquer a vast, terrifying, and completely unmapped jungle. Every morning, this explorer wakes up before dawn, sharpens their machete, and steps into the thick underbrush. They hack away at the vines with immense focus and relentless energy. When they encounter a steep ravine, they push themselves to their absolute physical limits to climb it. When they are exhausted, they force themselves to take 10 more steps. By all accounts, this explorer is courageous, deeply committed, and working incredibly hard. They are engaging in purposeful practice. They are pushing entirely past their comfort zone. But now, imagine a second explorer at the edge of the exact same jungle. This second explorer also has a sharp machete and a strong work ethic. However, before taking a single step, they unroll a highly detailed map, a map drawn by generations of explorers who have spent centuries mapping every single inch of this territory. Furthermore, standing right beside this second explorer is a seasoned guide who has successfully crossed this exact jungle 50 times. When the second explorer starts walking, the guide says, "Do not step on that moss, it hides quicksand," or "Save your energy today because tomorrow we must climb a vertical cliff." Both explorers are sweating, both are pushing their limits. But the first explorer is likely to spend months walking in circles, burning immense energy just to survive, and may never reach the other side. The second explorer is moving with surgical precision, bypassing years of trial and error, and walking a straight line to their destination. This is the profound critical difference between purposeful practice and the ultimate pinnacle of human development: deliberate practice. Purposeful practice, setting goals, focusing intensely, getting feedback, and stepping out of your comfort zone is a massive leap forward from simply repeating the same old habits. It will make you significantly better at almost anything. But effort alone, even highly focused effort, has a hard ceiling. If you are charting the path yourself, relying only on your own intuition and your own limited perspective, you will eventually hit a wall you cannot climb over. You will inadvertently reinforce a subtle bad habit, or you will fail to see a structural flaw in your technique. Deliberate practice is the gold standard. It is the most powerful, consistently effective method for building expertise ever discovered by human beings. But unlike purposeful practice, which you can apply to anything from gardening to learning a new software program, true deliberate practice has incredibly strict prerequisites. It cannot happen in a vacuum. It requires two fundamental pillars to exist. The first pillar is that the field you are trying to master must be highly developed. It must be a domain where the path to greatness has already been carved out by thousands of people over many generations. Think of classical music, ballet, competitive gymnastics, or chess. In these fields, humanity has collectively spent centuries figuring out exactly what works and what does not. There is a clear, objective standard of what separates a grandmaster from an amateur. The curriculum is known. A classical violin teacher today does not have to guess how to teach a beginner. There is a deeply established progression of scales, techniques, and specific pieces of music designed to slowly, systematically build the perfect mental representations in a student's mind. The map already exists. The second and absolutely non-negotiable pillar of deliberate practice is that you must have a teacher. You cannot engage in deliberate practice entirely on your own. To understand why, we must return to the concept of mental representations. When you are trying to master a complex skill, your internal map of that skill is incomplete and blurry. You literally do not possess the mental equipment to see your own mistakes. You might know that your tennis serve is weak or your public speaking delivery falls flat, but you do not have the sophisticated perspective required to understand the precise mechanical failure causing the problem. A master teacher already possesses the crystal clear, highly complex mental representation you are desperately trying to build. Their job is not merely to offer encouragement or to tell you to work harder. In fact, a great coach rarely tells you to try harder. Instead, a great coach watches you perform, compares your movement against the perfect mental map in their head, and identifies the microscopic deviation you cannot see. Picture a young athlete training for competitive diving. She is practicing a complex, twisting dive off a high platform. Over and over again, she hits the water at a slight angle, resulting in a painful splash and a ruined score. She climbs out of the pool, frustrated, telling herself she just needs to twist her hips faster. She climbs the ladder, tries to twist faster, and fails again. She is trapped in her own blurry mental representation. Then her coach steps forward. The coach has watched thousands of dives. The coach does not tell her to twist her hips. The coach says, "Your chin is tucking toward your chest a fraction of a second too late as you leave the board. That delay is throwing off your center of gravity." But the magic of deliberate practice does not stop at the diagnosis. The coach does not simply tell her to fix her chin and send her back up the scary high dive. Instead, the coach takes her entirely out of the pool. They go to a trampoline with a safety harness. The coach assigns her a completely different, deeply specific micro drill that isolates nothing but the chin tuck, removing the fear of hitting the water, removing the complexity of the full dive, and forcing her brain to focus entirely on that one tiny physiological change. She performs that drill 50 times until the new chin tuck overwrites the old habit. Then, and only then, does she go back to the high dive. She executes the jump, the chin tucks perfectly automatically, and she slices into the water without a sound. That is deliberate practice. It is highly structured, deeply informed, expertly guided effort. It requires humility. It requires surrendering your ego and admitting that you cannot see the forest because you are lost in the trees. It is trusting someone else to break your skills down to the studs, identify the rot, and give you the specific tools to rebuild the foundation. When you combine the intense, focused energy of purposeful practice with the expert map and guided course correction of deliberate practice, human potential becomes virtually limitless. It is the exact formula that creates child prodigies, Olympic gold medalists, and historical geniuses. They were not born with magic. They were born into environments that subjected them to the gold standard of training from an early age. But this leaves us with a profound and incredibly common dilemma. What happens if your life does not look like the world of a classical pianist or an Olympic diver? What if you are a manager trying to lead a team, a salesperson trying to close better deals, a software engineer trying to write more elegant code, or an entrepreneur trying to build a business? These are messy, chaotic fields. The rules are constantly changing. There is no 300-year-old curriculum for being a great modern leader. There is no perfect, universally agreed upon map. Does this mean the gold standard is useless to you? Absolutely not. It means you must learn to adapt the principles of the gold standard to the messy reality of the professional world. You must learn how to forge your own map, find your own guides, and turn your daily job into a relentless laboratory for deliberate practice. Chapter 5. Mastery at Work. Rethinking the Professional Grind. There is a stark, intimidating contrast between the pristine, quiet halls of a classical music conservatory and the chaotic, buzzing floor of a modern office building. In the conservatory, the rules of mastery have been settled for centuries. The student sits on a bench, their hands hovering over the piano keys, guided by a master teacher who knows exactly which centuries-old exercise will fix a subtle flaw in their technique. The environment is entirely designed for one single purpose: deliberate practice. But then we look at our own lives. We wake up, drink our coffee, commute through heavy traffic, and sit down at our desks to face the overwhelming reality of the modern professional world. Whether you are managing a team, negotiating complex sales, writing software, or running a small business, you are operating in a messy, unpredictable environment. There is no ancient, universally agreed upon curriculum for your job. There is no master coach standing over your shoulder, analyzing your emails or evaluating your boardroom presentations. The rules of your industry change every few years, if not every few months. When faced with this chaotic reality, it is easy to assume that the gold standard of deliberate practice simply does not apply to you. It is easy to surrender to the idea that you just have to show up, work hard, and hope that experience will eventually turn you into an expert. But, as we have already discovered, simply repeating your daily tasks for 20 years will not lead to mastery. It will only lead to permanent mediocrity. If you want to achieve true greatness in the messy reality of the professional world, you do not abandon the principles of deliberate practice. You do something far more courageous. You adapt them. You must learn to transform your daily grind into a private, relentless laboratory for human development. The first and most critical shift you must make is to fundamentally change how you view professional improvement. For generations, the corporate world has been trapped in a massive, expensive delusion. We have confused the accumulation of knowledge with the development of skill. Think about how most professionals are told to improve. When a company wants to develop better leaders, what do? They send their managers to a weekend seminar. The managers sit in a comfortable conference room drinking bottled water, while a charismatic speaker clicks through a slideshow about the pillars of effective communication. The managers take copious notes. They highlight passages in a workbook. At the end of the weekend, they receive a certificate of completion, and they return to the office feeling incredibly inspired. They possess new knowledge, but 3 weeks later, a massive crisis hits the department. A vital project is suddenly delayed, a major client is threatening to leave, and 2 team members are screaming at each other in the hallway. The manager steps out of their office, their heart pounding against their ribs, a cold sweat breaking out on their neck. In that moment of visceral, high-stakes pressure, all the highlighted workbooks and inspirational slideshows evaporate from their mind. They panic, they react emotionally, they fail to de-escalate the situation, and the crisis deepens. Why did this happen? Because listening to a lecture about leadership does not build the neural pathways required to actually lead under pressure. You cannot read your way to a skill. Knowledge is passive, skill is active. If a surgeon wants to learn a new, complex procedure to save a life, they do not just read an article in a medical journal and then walk directly into an operating room to cut someone open. They read the article to get the concept, but then they practice the physical movements on a cadaver or a sophisticated simulation machine hundreds of times before they ever touch a living human being. To master your profession, you must stop asking, "What new information do I need to consume?" and start asking, "What specific action do I need to perform and how can I practice it safely?" In the absence of a formal curriculum, you must become your own architect. This process begins with identifying the true top performers in your specific environment. Because your field is subjective, You cannot simply look up a global ranking or an objective score. You have to be deeply observant. You must look past the people with the fanciest titles, the loudest voices, and the most aggressive self-promotion. You are looking for the quiet, undeniable evidence of consistent, exceptional results. Imagine you are a mid-level sales professional who is struggling to close high-stakes negotiations. You feel like you always concede too much ground at the final hour. You look around your company and identify a senior colleague who consistently closes the largest, most profitable deals, year after year, regardless of the economic climate. They are your target. They are the master who possesses the mental representation you desperately need. But here is where most people make a critical error. They will invite this senior colleague to coffee, sit down and ask, "What is your secret? How do you close so well?" If you ask an expert how they do what they do, they will almost always give you a terrible answer. They will say things like, "You just have to trust your gut," or "It is all about building relationships," or "You just have to be confident." They are not lying to you. They literally cannot explain it. Their skills have become so deeply automated, so intricately woven into their mental representations, that they are no longer consciously aware of the microscopic decisions they are making. You cannot ask the master for the map. You have to steal it by watching them walk the territory. Instead of asking for vague advice over coffee, you ask the senior colleague for permission to sit silently in the corner of the room during their next 3 major negotiations. You become an absolute ghost, watching their every move with intense forensic focus. You are not listening to the general flow of the conversation. You are dissecting the mechanics. You notice that when the client aggressively demands a lower price, the master does not immediately defend their position or offer a discount. Instead, the master goes completely silent for exactly 4 seconds. They let the tension hang in the air. Then, instead of talking about price, they ask a highly specific, probing question about the client's timeline. In that moment of observation, you have just discovered a piece of the invisible architecture. You have identified a specific, actionable skill, the use of tactical silence and question shifting under emotional pressure. Now that you have identified the skill, you face the final and most difficult challenge of the professional grind. You must find a way to practice it. You cannot practice this new technique for the very first time during a multi-million-dollar deal of your own. The stakes are too high. The fear of losing the deal will trigger your body's survival instincts, your brain will revert to its comfortable old habits, and you will panic and offer a discount. You must build a simulation. You must create a sandbox where failure is safe. You go to a trusted peer, someone who is equally committed to growth, and you ask them to role-play with you. You sit in an empty office. You have your peer adopt the persona of your most difficult, aggressive client. You tell them to push you hard on price, to act angry, to make you feel as uncomfortable as possible. The first time you try to hold the 4 seconds of silence, it feels agonizing. 2 seconds in, the silence feels so heavy and awkward that you involuntarily blurt out an apology. You have failed. But this failure is beautiful because it cost you absolutely nothing. You reset, you try again, you practice holding your breath, grounding your feet, and letting the silence stretch. You practice delivering the probing question with a calm, neutral tone. You do it 10 times. You do it 20 times. You do it until the artificial pressure of the role play no longer causes your heart to race. You do it until the response is wired into your nervous system. This is how you bring the gold standard of deliberate practice into the mundane reality of the Tuesday morning office. You can apply this method to absolutely anything. If you want to become a brilliant strategic thinker, do not just read books on strategy. Go back into your company's archives and find a major strategic decision that was made 5 years ago. Read all the data and the emails leading up to the decision, but stop before you read the final outcome. Sit quietly and force yourself to make the decision. Write down your exact reasoning, your predictions, and your concerns. Then, open the rest of the file and compare your thought process to what the master strategists actually did and what the real-world results were. Where was your mental map blurry? Where did you miss a crucial variable? You are effectively practicing years of strategic leadership in a single afternoon. If you want to become a better public speaker, do not practice in front of a mirror where you feel completely safe. Record yourself on video. Watch it back with the sound off to see your nervous physical tics. Then listen to it while staring at a wall, listening only for the hesitations and the filler words. Then force yourself to deliver the presentation to a small group of highly critical colleagues who are instructed to interrupt you and ask difficult questions, simulating the worst-case scenario of a hostile boardroom. The professional grind ceases to be a grind the moment you stop seeing your daily tasks as a checklist to be survived and start seeing them as a gymnasium for your mind. You are no longer just an employee trying to get to Friday. You are a scientist, and your career is your laboratory. You are constantly identifying the masters, dissecting their invisible methods, constructing safe environments to fail, and meticulously rewiring your own brain to execute under pressure. When you adopt this relentless, active approach to your work, a profound transformation occurs. The anxiety of feeling stagnant begins to disappear, replaced by the thrilling, deeply human sensation of continuous expansion. You stop waiting for your company to develop you, and you take absolute ownership of your own mastery. But what happens when we leave the office? What happens when we turn this incredible lens of deliberate practice away from our professional ambitions and point it directly at the quiet, personal passions that give our lives deep, emotional meaning? The journey of mastery does not end when we clock out. In fact, for many of us, that is exactly where the most beautiful part of the journey begins.
Chapter 6. Mastery at Home, Elevating Everyday Life. There is a profound sanctuary waiting for us at the end of a long day, when the obligations of the workplace fade and the demands of the world quiet down. We are left with the fragile, beautiful hours of our own personal time. It is in these margins of life that we pursue the things we truly love. We pick up a paintbrush, we lace up a pair of worn running shoes, we sit down at a slightly out-of-tune piano, or we open a notebook to write. These personal passions are deeply important. They are the quiet rebellions against a world that constantly demands our productivity. They are the spaces where we go to find joy, expression, and a sense of self. When we first begin a new hobby or personal pursuit, there is almost always a honeymoon phase. The progress is intoxicating. Every time you touch the canvas or step onto the tennis court, you are noticeably better than you were the week before. The brain is lighting up with new connections, the body is discovering new rhythms, and the sheer momentum of learning fills you with an electric sense of possibility. You feel like a completely new version of yourself is being born, but then, almost without fail, the momentum slows. The sweeping gains of the first few months shrink into tiny, imperceptible shifts. Eventually, the progress stops entirely. You have hit the wall, you have reached the plateau. There is a quiet, hidden tragedy in the way most people respond to the plateau in their personal lives. Think of someone you know who decided to learn a new language for a trip overseas, or a friend who bought an expensive acoustic guitar with dreams of playing beautiful music. They hit that wall of stagnation and suddenly, the joy evaporates. The guitar sits in the corner of the living room, gathering dust, transforming from a symbol of freedom into a silent monument to failure. The language app on their phone is deleted. When asked about it, they simply shrug and say, "I guess I just did not have the talent for it," or "I just ran out of time." But they did not run out of talent, and they did not run out of time. They simply ran out of easy progress, and they did not know how to generate the difficult kind. They allowed the plateau to dictate their potential, entirely unaware that the plateau is not a dead end. It is simply a locked door, and deliberate practice is the key. Bringing the intense, focused principles of deliberate practice into your living room, your garage, or your local community center requires a delicate balance. You are not trying to win an Olympic gold medal, and you likely do not have a world-class coach standing over you to correct your posture. But the underlying mechanics of human growth do not care about your ultimate ambitions. Whether you want to be the best in the world or simply the best version of yourself, the rules of the mind remain exactly the same. To shatter a personal plateau, you must first fundamentally change the way you interact with your own limitations. When we hit a wall in a hobby, our natural instinct is to simply try harder. We decide we're going to run the same route, just faster. We sit down at the piano and play the same difficult song from beginning to end, over and over, hoping that sheer repetition will smooth out the mistakes. This is the trap of naive practice, and it is the absolute worst way to handle a plateau. When you play a song from start to finish and stumble through the hardest part, you are not fixing the mistake. You are literally baking the mistake deeper into your nervous system. You are practicing how to fail,
Breaking through requires a complete shift in perspective. You must become a forensic investigator of your own failures. You cannot fix everything at once. You must locate the exact microscopic point of breakdown. Imagine an amateur chef who loves baking bread on the weekends, but is deeply frustrated because their loaves always come out dense and flat, never light and airy like the artisan bakeries. For months, this baker just keeps making bread, trying slightly different recipes, hoping for a miracle. To apply deliberate practice, they must stop blindly baking entire loaves. They must isolate the variables. Is the water temperature killing the yeast? Is the kneading technique failing to develop the gluten? They must run highly controlled miniature experiments. They might spend an entire Saturday doing nothing but mixing small bowls of flour and water at different temperatures and charting the chemical reactions, throwing away the results without ever actually baking a loaf. It feels completely counterintuitive. It feels like you are moving backward, dismantling the very activity you enjoy. But this willingness to deconstruct your own performance, to zoom in on the single, ugly, frustrating weak point and hammer at it relentlessly, is the only way to break the structural integrity of a plateau. Once the baker masters the exact water temperature, they reassemble the process. The next loaf they bake rises beautifully. The wall has been breached. But doing this alone is incredibly difficult, which brings us to the greatest challenge of everyday mastery, the absence of a teacher. The gold standard of deliberate practice relies heavily on a master coach to point out the flaws we cannot see. If you are learning to paint in your kitchen at midnight, you do not have that luxury. You have to learn how to build your own mirrors. We live in an era of unprecedented access to human brilliance. Whatever obscure hobby or passion you are pursuing, there is a master who has recorded their performance, written a book about it, or filmed a breakdown of their technique. But simply watching these masters is not enough. Watching is passive entertainment. To build your own feedback loop, you must study them with an aggressive, analytical hunger. You must take the performance of the master and place it side by side with your own. This requires immense vulnerability because you have to record yourself. There is perhaps nothing more uncomfortable for an amateur than listening to a recording of their own voice, watching a video of their own golf swing, or reading their own rough draft immediately after reading a masterpiece. The gap between your taste and your current ability will feel like a physical blow. You will wince. But inside that wince is the exact feedback you are looking for. By holding your imperfect reality up against the master's blueprint, the invisible flaws suddenly become glaringly obvious. You realize your golf swing is breaking at the wrist a full second too early. You realize your painting lacks depth because your shadows do not contain enough blue. You have successfully bypassed the need for a physical coach by using the master's artifact as your teacher and your own recording as the mirror. As you begin to apply these intense, focused methods to your personal life, you will inevitably run into the darkest, most difficult part of the journey. You will encounter the days when you simply do not want to do it. The couch is warm, the television is inviting, and the thought of facing your own inadequacies feels completely exhausting. When we give up on a passion, we almost always blame a mysterious, invisible force called willpower. We tell ourselves that we simply lack the discipline required to achieve greatness. We look at people who practice their craft for hours a day and assume they were born with an ironclad superhuman reserve of motivation that we were somehow denied. This is a devastating lie. Willpower is not a genetic trait. It is not a magical fuel tank that some people have and others do not. Motivation is simply an equation. It is the delicate, constantly shifting balance between your reasons to continue and your reasons to stop. When you start a new hobby, your reasons to continue are massive: excitement, novelty, the thrill of rapid progress. Your reasons to stop are very small. But when you hit a plateau and practice becomes frustrating and difficult, the equation violently flips. The joy of progress vanishes and the heavy friction of effort becomes overwhelming. If you rely purely on emotional enthusiasm to keep you going, you will quit. Every single time. To maintain long-term mastery, you must stop waiting for motivation to strike and start engineering your environment to manipulate the equation. First, you must aggressively, ruthlessly eliminate the reasons to stop. You must remove the friction between you and the work. If you want to write a novel before work every morning, but your laptop is zipped inside a backpack in another room and your desk is covered in bills, that tiny amount of physical friction will be enough to kill your ambition at 5 in the morning. A person practicing everyday mastery designs their world for inevitable success. They clear the desk the night before. They open the word processor. They leave the coffee mug sitting exactly where it needs to be. When they wake up, the path of least resistance is to sit down and type. Second, you must build artificial reasons to continue. You must recognize that the human animal is deeply, fundamentally social. Doing difficult things in isolation is a recipe for surrender. To push through the darkest valleys of practice, you must find your tribe. You must surround yourself with people who care about the exact same obscure, difficult things that you do. When you join a community of fellow writers, a local running club, or an online forum of amateur woodworkers, you are anchoring your personal struggle to a shared reality. When your internal motivation fails, and it absolutely will, the external expectation of your peers will carry you through. You practice not just for yourself, but because you want to have something to share, something to discuss, something to contribute to the tribe. Mastery in everyday life is not about turning your hobby into a second stressful job. It is about honoring your own potential. It is about refusing to let your mind settle into a comfortable, automated slumber. When you engage in deliberate practice for no other reason than the pure, private pursuit of excellence, you are exercising the highest function of human consciousness. You are proving to yourself that you are capable of limitless transformation. And when you fully grasp just how deeply malleable the human machine is, you cannot help but wonder, if ordinary people can achieve such profound changes in their spare time, what happens when a human being is immersed in this intense, deliberate fire from the very beginning of their life? To understand the absolute zenith of human capability, we must trace the timeline back to the very start. We must look at how the greatest masters the world has ever known were built from the ground up. Chapter 7. The Making of an Expert. The Early Years. When we witness the breathtaking performance of a true master, our minds play a trick on us. We watch a brilliant architect sketch a visionary building, or a grand master effortlessly control a chessboard, and we subconsciously project their current brilliance all the way back to the day they were born. We imagine them as miniature adults, emerging into the world with a fierce, quiet focus and an innate understanding of their destiny. But if we were to actually rewind the clock and observe the early years of those who eventually redefine human boundaries, we would not see polished prodigies. We would see ordinary, clumsy, easily distracted children. The journey from an ordinary child to a world-class performer is never a straight genetic line. It is a massive, multi-phased developmental construction project. And the most surprising truth about this journey is that the very first step on the road to extraordinary is almost never characterized by intense discipline or grueling, deliberate practice. The first step is simply play. It is the sparking of an undeniable, emotional flame. Imagine a young child walking into a gymnasium for the very first time. The room is vast, echoing with voices, smelling faintly of chalk dust and worn canvas. To an adult, it is a training facility, but to a 4-year-old, it is an oversized playground. They see massive foam pits to dive into, bouncy blue floors to run across, and colorful rings hanging from the ceiling. If, on that very first day, a strict coach blew a whistle, forced the child to stand in a perfectly straight line and demanded they perform 50 identical painful stretches, the child's relationship with gymnastics would be destroyed instantly. The environment would be associated with pain, restriction, and fear. But the parents of future experts do not operate this way. They introduce their children to complex fields through the lens of pure, unstructured joy. The parent allows the child to hurl themselves into the foam pit, laughing hysterically. They praise the child just for participating. They create a deep, profound neurological association between the activity and the feelings of love, attention, and security. The child begins to beg to go back to the gymnasium, not because they have a burning desire to win an Olympic medal, but simply because it feels wonderful to be there. This initial spark is entirely mandatory. You cannot force a human being to endure the lonely, agonizing years of deliberate practice that mastery requires if they do not first possess a deep, emotional anchor to the activity itself. The love must be planted before the labor can begin. However, raw, unbridled play does not build mental representations. Splashing in a pool does not teach you the mechanics of the butterfly stroke, and banging enthusiastically on a piano keyboard does not teach you music theory. Eventually, if the child is to progress, the playful noise must be carefully transformed into structured skill. This is the transition into the second phase of mastery, becoming serious. And it is marked by the introduction of the very first teacher. There is a common misconception that if a parent wants their child to be the best in the world, they must immediately hire the most elite, demanding, world-renowned coach available. In reality, handing a beginner to a master coach is often a devastating mistake. A coach who spends their days refining the microscopic flaws of elite athletes often lacks the patience and the empathetic touch required to nurture a fragile, developing mind. The perfect early teacher is someone entirely different. They are usually a local instructor who is warm, wildly encouraging, and deeply patient. Their primary job is not to forge a champion, but to gently introduce the child to the concept of practice without extinguishing the flame of joy. They teach the child how to hold the instrument, how to stand on the starting block, and most importantly, they establish the absolute fundamental rhythm of learning. You try, you fail, you receive gentle correction, and you try again. Under the guidance of this first teacher, the child experiences their first taste of actual progress. They learn a simple song, or they successfully execute a cartwheel, and the teacher showers them with praise. The parents celebrate. The child feels a surge of pride, and that pride acts as the fuel to keep going. But this beautiful, encouraging phase comes with an expiration date. As the child progresses, the easy gains vanish. The honeymoon period ends. The skills become vastly more complex, requiring deep, uncomfortable concentration. Practice is no longer a fun game played for applause. It becomes a daily, solitary, frustrating requirement. This is the most dangerous precipice in the journey of an expert. The child, being a child, will inevitably want to quit. They will look out the window and see their friends riding bicycles in the summer sun, while they are trapped inside doing endless repetitive drills. Their developing brains simply do not possess the long-term vision to sacrifice a beautiful afternoon for a theoretical reward that is 10 years away. In this critical window, a profound psychological transfer must occur. The child must borrow the willpower of their parents. Consider the reality of a young boy who has been swimming competitively for a few years. He is 9 years old. It is 5 o'clock on a Tuesday morning in the dead of winter. The alarm clock shatters the silence of the dark bedroom. The boy is exhausted. His muscles ache. He pulls the blankets over his head and begins to cry, declaring that he hates the water, he hates the pool, and he is never swimming again. If the parent relies entirely on the child's internal motivation, the journey ends right there in the dark. But the parents of those who eventually reach the pinnacle of their fields act as a massive, external scaffolding for their child's developing discipline. The parent does not scream, and they do not negotiate. They calmly pull the blankets back. They lift the child out of bed. They have a warm bowl of oatmeal already waiting on the kitchen counter. They warm up the car. They carry the boy's gear, and they drive him through the freezing rain to the aquatic center. The parent absorbs the friction of the morning. They enforce the routine with a gentle, immovable consistency. The parent becomes the executive function that the child's brain has not yet built. Day after day, year after year, through tears, plateaus, and growth spurts, the parent holds the line. They do not praise the child for being naturally talented when they win. They praise the child for the invisible hours of hard work that led to the victory. They constantly reinforce the connection between the painful struggle of practice and the joy of success. And then, if the scaffolding is held in place long enough, a miraculous, invisible shift occurs. Usually, in early adolescence, the external structure begins to internalize. The boy diving into the freezing pool at dawn begins to notice something profound. He is beating his own times. He is moving through the water with a sleek, powerful efficiency that feels incredible. He starts setting his own goals. He begins to read books about swimming technique, completely unprompted. One dark winter morning, the alarm goes off at 5 o'clock. But this time, the parent does not have to walk into the bedroom. The boy is already awake. He is packing his own bag. He makes his own oatmeal. The psychological transfer is complete. The motivation has shifted from the external pressure of the parent to a burning internal furnace of personal ambition. The identity of the child has fundamentally crystallized. He no longer views swimming as an activity that he does, he views it as who he is. This internalization is the ultimate goal of the early years. The spark of play ignited the fire, the first teacher built the hearth, and the borrowed willpower of the parents kept the flames alive through the long, difficult winters of early practice. But this newly forged identity, strong as it is, only marks the end of the beginning. The foundation has been poured, and the launch pad is built. Now the adolescent finds themselves looking at a terrifying horizon. The warm, encouraging local teacher no longer has anything left to teach them. The parents can no longer push them because the young expert is moving at a speed the parents can barely comprehend. To reach the absolute edge of human capability, the developing master must leave the safety of their childhood environment. They must step out into the rarefied, intensely competitive and deeply unforgiving world of elite performance where the rules of the game change entirely. Chapter 8. Pushing the boundaries. Reaching the extraordinary. At some point on the journey toward mastery, the warm, nurturing environment of the early years must be left behind. The local teacher who praised your early efforts has given you everything they have to give. The massive, exhilarating leaps in progress that characterized your youth have slowed to a grinding halt. You pack up the foundational skills you have spent years building and you step across a definitive threshold into an entirely new atmosphere. The air here is thinner, the expectations are merciless. You have entered the adult phase of elite performance, and the rules of the game are completely different. In this rarefied space, you are no longer learning the mechanics of your craft, you are attempting to perfect them. To do this, you must seek out a true master mentor. But the dynamic between student and teacher at this elite level is nothing like the gentle encouragement of the past. A world-class coach is not there to hold your hand, wipe your tears, or protect your ego. They are there to look at the highly complex, incredibly sturdy mental representations you have built over a decade and systematically smash them to pieces. When you reach the upper echelons of any field, your flaws are no longer obvious. You are not making beginner mistakes. You are making microscopic errors that are completely invisible to the untrained eye. Your new mentor's entire purpose is to force you into a state of intense, agonizing self-awareness. They will isolate a tiny fragment of your performance. A slight hesitation in a debate, a fraction of a millimeter in a brushstroke, a barely perceptible shift in your weight during a jump, and force you to drill that single, agonizing movement for weeks on end. The physical and psychological toll of this phase is immense. Practice is no longer fun. It is not a game, and it is not a hobby. It is a grueling, exhausting confrontation with your own profound inadequacies, day after single day. Consider the modern arena of digital creation. Imagine a creator who decides to forge a massive audience from scratch by committing to a deeply unforgiving schedule, publishing a heavily produced, meticulously crafted piece of content every single day for 100 straight days. In the beginning, the momentum is pure adrenaline. They adapt quickly, learning to take vast amounts of complex information and restructure it into elegant, deeply engaging 10-part narratives. They master their visual style, designing striking, dark-themed cinematic lighting to instantly captivate the psychology of their viewers. For the first 2 months, the progress is thrilling, the metrics climb. But then comes day 70. The initial adrenaline has completely evaporated. The creator hits a brutal, uncompromising wall. The audience growth flatlines, despite the fact that the creator is working harder than ever. The sheer psychological weight of waking up, staring at stagnant numbers and forcing the mind into a state of intense creative flow feels like moving mountains of stone. The mind screams for a break. The body begs for rest. It is the darkest valley of the journey. Most people quietly surrender at day 71. They tell themselves they gave it their best shot and they retreat to the comfort zone. But the individual on the path to the extraordinary does not surrender, nor do they rely on a sudden burst of magical inspiration. They rely on the ruthless, deliberate refinement of their process. They sit down with their mentor, or they analyze their own data with a cold forensic eye, and they begin to experiment. They do not change everything in a panic. They change one tiny variable in their storytelling hook. They adjust the pacing of their audio by a fraction of a second. They endure the terrifying isolation of the grind, knowing that at this level, progress is not measured in leaps. It is measured in agonizingly small inches. As you endure this crucible, a profound internal transformation occurs. Because your master mentor is constantly forcing you to analyze your microscopic failures, you eventually learn to see yourself through their eyes. Their voice, their critical gaze, and their impossibly high standards become permanently installed in your own mind. You develop a mental representation not just of the skill itself, but of the very process of evaluating the skill. This is the ultimate objective of the master teacher, to make themselves entirely obsolete. And one day, it happens. You step out onto the ice, you walk into the operating room, or you sit down to write, and you realize that you no longer need the coach. You can predict your own failures before they happen. You can diagnose your own microscopic deviations in real time. You have become your own master. But this realization brings you to the most terrifying and magnificent precipice of all. You have reached the frontier. Throughout your entire journey, you have been following a map. You have been studying the techniques developed by the generations of masters who came before you. You have been trying to match a standard that already existed. But what happens when you perfectly master everything that is already known? What happens when you reach the absolute edge of human knowledge in your field? There are no more teachers here, there are no more textbooks, and there are no more historical examples to dissect. You are standing in the dark looking out into the unmapped wilderness of human potential. To go further, you must become a pioneer. You must take the incredibly dense, flawless mental representations you have spent your entire life building, and you must use them to imagine something that has never existed before. This is how human history is rewritten. A figure skater, having mastered every known jump, understands the physics of their own body so intimately that they realize an extra rotation is mathematically possible, and they launch themselves into the air to invent a move the world has never seen. A surgeon, intimately familiar with every established pathway to the heart, envisions a completely new angle of incision that will cut recovery time in half, and they risk everything to try it. They push the boundary of their domain outward, creating a new gold standard. And the moment they succeed, the rest of the world immediately begins studying their new technique, adding it to the map for the next generation. When we watch these pioneers perform on the absolute edge of the frontier, it is a deeply humbling experience. We see them executing movements, solving problems, and creating art with a level of grace and power that seems utterly impossible for a normal human being to achieve. And because their abilities are so incomprehensibly far beyond our own, the old comfortable whisper returns to our minds. We look at their decades of agonizing practice, we acknowledge their master teachers, and we respect their relentless grind, but a stubborn doubt lingers. We think to ourselves, yes, they worked incredibly hard, but surely to go that far, to invent something completely new, they must have been born with something I do not have. They must have a genetic advantage. Before we can look to the future of our own potential, we must drag this final, persistent ghost out into the light. We must definitively answer the oldest question of all. In the face of relentless, deliberate practice, what is the actual role of natural talent? Chapter 9. The Truth About Natural Talent. There is a stubborn, romantic ghost that haunts almost every conversation about human greatness. We have journeyed through the intricate mechanics of neuroplasticity. We have deconstructed the intense, uncomfortable reality of deliberate practice. We have seen exactly how the human brain fundamentally rewires itself to achieve the impossible. Yet, even armed with all of this irrefutable biological evidence, a quiet voice inside our minds often whispers a lingering doubt. The voice says, yes, practice is powerful. But what about the chosen ones? What about the prodigies who touch a piano keyboard and make it sing on the very first day? What about the child who seems to effortlessly comprehend complex mathematics while everyone else is struggling to count? Surely they have something in their blood that the rest of us simply do not possess. Before we can look to the future of our own potential, we must look this ghost directly in the eye. We must dismantle the final, most deeply entrenched barrier to human growth, the myth of innate genetic destiny. To understand why we are so obsessed with the idea of natural talent, we have to look at how we observe the world. As human beings, we are incredibly poor at evaluating the invisible past. We only see the present moment. When we see a 7-year-old child perform a breathtakingly beautiful dance routine, Our minds cannot comprehend the thousands of unseen hours of stumbling, crying, and relentless repetition that occurred in the privacy of their home. Because the effort is invisible to us, our brains reach for the easiest, most magical explanation. They were simply born that way. But if we peel back the curtain on these so-called natural prodigies, we do not find magic. We find a massive, often hidden head start. We find an environment that acted as a high-pressure greenhouse for human development. Let us examine how the illusion of talent is actually manufactured, entirely by accident, in almost every classroom in the world. Imagine two 6-year-old children sitting side by side on their very first day of art class. The teacher places a blank piece of paper and a box of crayons in front of each of them and asks them to draw a house. Child A has spent the last 3 years in a home where their older sibling loves to draw. Child A has been quietly watching their sibling, copying their hand movements, and absorbing the basic spatial concept of a square with a triangle on top. It was not deliberate practice, but it was thousands of hours of passive exposure and playful imitation. Child B, on the other hand, comes from a home where there are no crayons. Their parents love them dearly, but they spend their time playing outside or building with wooden blocks. Child B has never held a crayon before this exact moment. Child A picks up the crayon with a comfortable grip and confidently draws a recognizable house. Child B clumsily grasps the crayon in their fist and scribbles a chaotic, asymmetrical blob. The teacher walks by, looks at Child A's paper, and gasps with genuine delight. "Oh my goodness," the teacher says, loudly enough for the whole room to hear. "You are a natural artist. You have a real gift." The teacher then looks at Child B's paper, offers a polite, tight-lipped smile, and moves on. In that fleeting, seemingly innocent moment, a profound psychological earthquake has occurred. The teacher has taken a tiny, temporary difference in background experience and mislabeled it as a permanent genetic superiority. Watch what happens next. Child A, overflowing with the warm, intoxicating glow of adult validation, goes home and immediately asks their parents for more paper. They begin drawing every single day. They love the identity of being the artist. They pour hundreds of hours of intense, focused effort into their drawing because the praise makes the effort feel wonderful. Child B, having deeply internalized the teacher's silence, decides that art is painful and embarrassing. They avoid drawing at all costs. Whenever they are forced to do it, they rush through it with their head down. Fast forward 20 years. Child A is a professional illustrator with work hanging in galleries. Child B is an accountant who laughs nervously and says, "I cannot even draw a stick figure. I just do not have the talent for it." To the outside world, this looks like definitive proof of natural talent. It looks like genetic destiny, but it is actually a devastating, self-fulfilling prophecy. The talent did not cause the success. The label of talent caused the practice, and the practice caused the success. The initial gap between those two children was microscopic, nothing more than a few hours of prior exposure. But the psychological narrative attached to that gap created a massive exponential divergence in how they spent the next 2 decades of their lives. This leads us to a fascinating and dangerous paradox. Being labeled as naturally gifted is often the worst thing that can possibly happen to a developing mind. When a child is told that their success is due to an innate gift, they learn a terrible lesson. If you are truly gifted, things should be easy. For the first few years, this works fine. The child coasts on their early head start, receiving praise for effortless victories. But eventually, inevitably, the work becomes complex. The child hits a steep plateau. Suddenly, the math equations do not solve themselves. The piano piece requires agonizing, frustrating repetition. The child, who has anchored their entire identity to the idea of being a natural, completely shatters. They do not view the struggle as a normal part of the learning process. They view it as terrifying proof that their gift has run out. They believe they have been exposed as a fraud. To protect their fragile ego, they simply quit. They decide they are no longer interested in the piano, or they claim the math class is boring. Meanwhile, the child who was never called gifted, the child who was praised purely for their hard work and their willingness to endure frustration, hits that exact same wall and calmly rolls up their sleeves. They know that struggle is the price of admission. They push through the plateau, quietly bypassing the gifted prodigy who is sitting on the sidelines, paralyzed by the fear of failure. We must be brutally honest, however, about the physical boundaries of the human body. To completely dismiss genetics would be intellectually dishonest. If you harbor a deep desire to play center in professional basketball, but your genetic code dictates that your skeleton will stop growing at 5 feet and 6 inches tall, no amount of deliberate practice will make you a 7-foot giant. If you want to be an elite competitive swimmer, being born with an extraordinarily wide wingspan and exceptionally large hands provides an undeniable physical advantage in moving water. Physical, structural traits are real, but we must accurately understand their role. Being 7 feet tall does not automatically make you a masterful basketball player. It merely grants you entry into a specific room where the game is played. Once you are inside that room, standing shoulder to shoulder with other giants, your height ceases to be an advantage. The person who eventually dominates that room is the one who submits themselves to the most rigorous, intelligent, and relentless deliberate practice. The physical trait is the canvas, the skill is the painting, and the painting is entirely forged by human effort. What we call cognitive talent, the ability to think deeply, remember vast amounts of information, and solve complex problems, is not bounded by the same strict limits as our skeletal structure. The brain is not a bone. It is a continuously developing, wildly adaptable organ. The mental traits we so often assume are fixed at birth are actually the most malleable aspects of our entire humanity. The belief in natural talent is a comfortable, warm blanket. It allows us to watch the masters of the world and feel a sense of peaceful detachment. It allows us to excuse our own mediocrity by claiming that the gods simply did not favor us. But true liberation comes from throwing that blanket off. The moment you strip away the romantic myth of the gift, you are left standing in the cold, bright light of absolute responsibility. You realize that the distance between who you are right now and the master you wish to become is not measured in genetics. It is measured in hours. It is measured in the willingness to step out of the comfortable equilibrium of your life, to embrace the friction of failing, to seek out the brutal honesty of a mirror or a mentor, and to slowly, meticulously build the neural pathways of greatness inside your own mind. We are not born masters. We are born with the miraculous machinery required to build mastery. The profound question that remains is no longer whether we are capable of extraordinary things. The science has definitively answered that. The only question left is what we as a society will do with this breathtaking realization. If the limits of human potential are an illusion, how do we redesign our schools, our workplaces, and our own lives to unleash the greatness that is waiting dormant inside every single one of us?
Chapter 10. Expanding our potential. Where do we go from here? We have arrived at the edge of a profound paradigm shift. For centuries, humanity has operated under a collective, unspoken agreement about the nature of potential. We believed that greatness was a lottery, a mystical inheritance passed down through invisible genetic code. We looked at the vast, intimidating gap between the amateur and the master, and we filled that gap with the comforting myth of the gift. But as we have torn down that myth, piece by piece, we have uncovered a reality that is far more demanding and infinitely more beautiful. We now know, with absolute biological certainty, that the human brain and body are not fixed vessels waiting to be filled. They are highly responsive, deeply adaptable machines capable of completely rewiring their own physical structures. We know that the limits we feel are rarely the limits of our biology. They are simply the boundaries of our current homeostasis. We know that by embracing the uncomfortable, relentless friction of deliberate practice, we can build the intricate mental representations necessary to see the world as the masters see it. But this knowledge cannot simply remain a fascinating piece of personal philosophy. If the limits of human potential are truly an illusion, then almost every institution we have built to nurture that potential is fundamentally flawed. We are currently living in a society optimized for a lie. To truly grasp where we go from here, we must imagine what the world will look like when we finally redesign our systems to reflect the truth of human adaptability. We must begin by looking at the most critical, vulnerable laboratory of human potential, the modern classroom. Consider how education currently operates across most of the globe. A teacher stands at the front of a room, delivering information to 30 silent students. The students take notes, attempt to memorize the data,
and then sit for an examination. When the test scores are returned, a silent, invisible sorting mechanism is triggered. The children who score high are subtly or explicitly told that they are smart. The children who score low are told that they are not academically inclined, or that they simply do not have a head for mathematics. This system is an absolute tragedy. It treats education as a process of discovering talent rather than a process of building skill. When a child fails a math test under the current system, the failure is treated as a permanent diagnosis of their internal worth. But through the lens of deliberate practice, a failed math test is nothing more than a temporary lack of a specific mental representation. Imagine a school system rebuilt entirely on the principles of mastery. In this new world, classrooms are no longer silent lecture halls. They are loud, messy, active laboratories. The teacher is no longer a dispenser of facts, but a master coach. Instead of asking students to memorize the formula for structural load, the teacher hands the students a pile of raw materials and challenges them to build a bridge that can hold 20 pounds. When a student's bridge inevitably collapses, the environment does not label them a failure. The teacher steps in and helps the student isolate the exact mechanical flaw in their design. The student rebuilds the bridge, tests it again, and fails again, repeating this cycle until the structure holds. In this environment, the student is not just learning physics, they are learning the absolute most critical skill a human being can possess, the ability to sit comfortably in a state of failure, analyze a mistake, and forge a new path forward. They learn that their intellect is a muscle that grows through resistance, not a fixed trait decided at birth. This transformation does not stop when the school bell rings. It extends deeply into the landscape of our professional lives, changing how we innovate and build the future. Consider a team of automotive engineers in a bustling manufacturing hub, tasked with designing a completely new, revolutionary hybrid vehicle. Let us say they codename this ambitious project the Victoris. If this engineering team operates under the old, limiting rules of naive practice, they will stick to the comfortable shores of what they already know. They will take a standard combustion engine, bolt on an existing electric motor, make a few minor cosmetic modifications and push it to the market. They will hit their deadline, but they will not change the world. But if this engineering team operates under the ruthless, beautiful principles of deliberate practice, the entire factory floor transforms. They do not just build the Victoris, they use the creation of the Victoris to fundamentally upgrade their own mastery. They deliberately isolate the most complex, frustrating variables, perhaps the exact thermal transition point between electric and combustion power under heavy acceleration. They study the historic masters of fluid dynamics and electrical engineering. They build microscopic, high-pressure simulations. They fail thousands of times in the safety of the laboratory, pushing far past their corporate comfort zones. Because they refuse to accept the established boundaries of their industry, they eventually invent a hybrid system that shatters old standards of efficiency. They do not just manufacture a car, they redefine what is mechanically possible. When a society replaces the worship of natural talent with a deep reverence for deliberate practice, the entire speed of human innovation accelerates. But the most profound change of all is not what happens to our schools or our industries. It is what happens inside our own quiet, private minds. When you fully, unconditionally accept that your abilities are not fixed, it forces a deeply uncomfortable reckoning. You can never again look at a master and say, "I could never do that because I was not born with the gift." That excuse is gone, permanently stripped away by the hard reality of science. You are left with the heavy, undeniable truth that the distance between who you are today and who you wish to become is simply a matter of time, focus, and your willingness to endure the friction of growth. This is a heavy burden, but it is also the most liberating truth you will ever encounter. It means that your future is entirely in your own hands. You are the architect of your own mind. You possess an ancient biological machinery designed to adapt to whatever relentless demands you place upon it. If you want to become a brilliant writer, a masterful musician, a visionary leader, or an extraordinary parent, the path is wide open. It will not be easy. It will require you to wage a daily war against your own desire for comfort. It will require you to seek out the brutal honesty of mentors, to dissect your own failures without mercy, and to walk willingly into the dark, frustrating spaces of the unknown. But every time you step into that darkness, every time you force your brain to grapple with a problem just slightly beyond its reach, you are doing exactly what you were built to do. You are not a static monument to your own genetics. You are a living, breathing project of continuous expansion. The secrets of expertise are no longer secrets. The map has been drawn. The blueprint is in your hands. The only thing left to do is to begin the breathtaking work of building your own extraordinary life.